It was a night like few others in the village of Nyanga. The storm roared with unusual fury, as if the heavens wanted to announce something extraordinary. The wind howled through the dense trees of the forest, making the leaves dance like restless shadows in the intermittent light of the lightning. Inside a humble hut, far from the center of the village, Suri groaned in pain while tightly gripping the threadbare sheets of her bed. The heat of the night was muffled by the constant sound of rain hammering the thatched roof. Nthanda, the experienced midwife, stood beside her, murmuring prayers to the ancestors as she prepared herbs and compresses. "Breathe, Suri. It's almost time. Stay strong," Nthanda said, trying to remain calm despite the uneasiness she felt deep in her chest. The contractions were strong, and the birth was taking longer than usual. Suri, her face wet with sweat and tears, looked at Nthanda with eyes that demanded answers. "Please, my baby, will you be okay?" Suri's voice was barely audible among the thunder that echoed through the forest. Before Nthanda could respond, a particularly loud thunderclap shook the hut, making the fire in the center of the room dance in an almost menacing manner. Suri let out a final scream, and the cry of a newborn baby cut through the air like an unexpected melody. For a brief moment, there was relief. The sound of new life brought smiles of relief to both their faces. But when Nthanda held the baby in her hands, something changed. Her smile disappeared, replaced by an expression of shock that she couldn't hide. The baby was alive, breathing heavily, but there was something inexplicable about him. Two distinct faces adorned its tiny head, each perfectly formed, as if two faces were fighting to occupy the same space. One face looked peaceful, almost angelic, with closed eyes and a slight smile. The other, however, had a stern expression, her eyes half open with an intense glow that seemed to carry greater strength than a newborn should possess. Nthanda took a step back, almost dropping the baby. "The spirits, what did they do?" he whispered, unable to take his eyes off the child. "My son, is he healthy? Tell me," Suri pleaded, trying to lift herself up to see the baby. "He is alive, but Zui, something unusual has happened," Nthanda replied, his voice shaking with the weight of what he saw. She carefully placed the baby in Zuri's arms, who initially smiled with relief at seeing him safe. But the smile disappeared when she noticed the two faces. Outside, the first murmurs began to spread. The storm had not quieted, and the neighbors, alerted by Zuri's screams, now gathered in front of the cabin, eager for news. When a more curious woman peeked through the crack in the door and saw the baby, she backed away with a scream. "It's a spirit child," he exclaimed, making the others crowd even more, trying to understand what had happened. Inside the hut, Nthanda grabbed a clean towel and began to clean the baby, but her hands were shaking. "Zuri, you need to be strong. This is no ordinary birth. There is something bigger going on here, something even I can't understand." Zuri held the baby to her chest, shielding it from Nthanda's frightened gaze. "He's my son. That's all that matters," she said with determination, though her voice revealed a fear she didn't want to admit. Outside, the murmurs had turned into a loud hubbub. People from the village, what from the rain, whispered among themselves. "It's a sign," said an older man. "The spirits are warning us of something." "Or cursing us," replied a woman, her tone thick with superstition. The elders were called, and even in the relentless storm, they decided they needed to see the child immediately. When they entered the cabin, the smell of herbs and sultry heat enveloped them, but their eyes went straight to the baby in Zuri's arms. There was a moment of absolute silence. Then the oldest of the elders, Bakery, stepped forward, his eyes fixed on both faces. "This is not something to be feared or celebrated without reflection," he said, his deep voice cutting through the murmur of those present. "We need to consult the ancient texts, the stories of our ancestors. This baby could be a sign of balance or chaos." Silence returned to the cabin. The storm continued outside, as if nature itself was trapped in the same tension as the residents. Zuri held the baby even closer to her, while Nthanda and Bakery exchanged looks full of doubts and uncertainties. Deep in their hearts, Everyone knew that night would be remembered as the beginning of something that would change the village of Nyanga forever. The day after Amara's birth dawned under a gray sky, as if the world around her was still caught up in the storm that seemed to never end. Inside the hut, Suri cradled her son in her arms as she looked out the small window, seeing the first rays of light mix with the mist that rose from the damp ground. The baby was quiet, with one face relaxed in peaceful sleep, while the other wore an almost watchful expression, as if it was aware of the shadows that hovered around its existence. The village, which normally awoke with laughter and the sound of children running along the dirt paths, was strangely silent. Suri knew her life would never be the same. She had faced challenges before, from losing her parents at a young age to years of working tirelessly in the fields to support herself. But nothing had prepared her for this. Being a mother to a child already carrying the weight of meanings beyond her comprehension. She adjusted the blanket around Amara, tried to protect him not only from the morning chill, but also from the looks she knew would come. It didn't take long for rumors to spread. Soon, a small crowd formed outside the cabin, their murmurs turning into a rising wave of distrust. Some believed that Amara's birth was a sign from the ancestors, an omen of something great to come. Others, however, saw it as a symbol of curse, associating the storm and the village's recent problems with the baby's arrival. "It's impossible to ignore what we saw," said a woman from the village, looking suspiciously at Suri's hut. "Since he was born, the storm has not stopped, and the crops are soaked. It's as if the spirits are angry." "Be careful what you say, Nyanga," replied Bakery, the most respected elder. "The child carries a sign, yes, but who are we to judge it? Maybe it's a message from our ancestors, something we still don't understand." Inside the cabin, Suri heard voices approaching. Her heart sank, but she refused to give in to fear. "He's just a baby," she whispered to herself, as if those words could shake off the doubts that were beginning to creep into her mind. Standing up, she walked to the door and opened it slowly, looking at the curious and hesitant faces of the residents. "You're scared because you don't understand," she began, her voice firm despite the tension in her eyes. "But look at him. He's my son. He breathes, cries, feels hungry like any other baby. Why fear something we don't even try to understand?" Silence fell over the crowd. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others, like Nyanga, stood their ground, their expressions hardened by fear of the unknown. As Suri spoke, Bakery approached her, his steps slow and calculated. "You're brave, Suri," he said, glancing at the baby. "But courage is sometimes not enough. This village is divided, and when there is division, fear finds a home. It is your duty to protect this child, but know that the path will be difficult." Suri met Bakery's eyes, trying to decipher if his words were warning or encouragement. Before he could respond, a woman shouted from the crowd, "What if it is a warning? What if it brought bad luck? Can we risk the whole village because of a mother who doesn't want to see the truth?" Those words hit Suri like a cold blade. But before she could respond, Bakery raised his hand, asking for silence. "None of us know the truth," he said, his voice ringing with authority. "But that doesn't give us the right to condemn. We need wisdom, not fear. We gave it time. Perhaps the spirits themselves will reveal what they want." The crowd began to disperse, but tension remained in the air. Suri went back inside the cabin, closing the door behind her and feeling the weight of other people's judgment on her shoulders. Inside, she sat by the fire, watching the flames dance as she cradled Amara. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, it seemed as if the baby's two faces were looking at her at the same time, as if they shared a secret she couldn't yet understand. In the days that followed, Suri isolated herself from the rest of the village. She avoided leaving the house, fearing the inquisitive looks and whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But even in her seclusion, she didn't feel completely alone. Some people, like Bakery, continued to visit her, bringing herbs, food, and, occasionally, words of comfort. "You are stronger than you think," he said on one of his visits, as he helped rekindle the fire in the cabin. And perhaps it is this strength that the spirits wanted to test by giving her a son like Amara. "Don't give up, Suri. The love you have for him could be the difference between balance and chaos. Those words echoed in Zuri's mind, giving her the boost she needed to continue. She knew the road ahead would be hard, but she also knew she couldn't give up. Imara was her son, and she would fight for him no matter what it took. As the sun set that night, Zuri looked out the cabin window, seeing the shadows of the forest lengthen in the golden light. "They don't understand yet, my little one," he murmured to Imara as he held him against his chest. "But I understand. You are my gift, my proof that love can conquer even the greatest of fears." And with that, she closed her eyes, ready to face what the future had in store for her. The village of Nyanga was falling deeper and deeper into uncertainty. Imara's birth had cast a shadow of fear and doubt over the community, and the once peaceful environment now seemed full of tension. Conversations around campfires at night were no longer about harvests or upcoming marriages, but about what to do with the two-faced child. Zuri felt the weight of this division more and more intensely. Every step he took outside the cabin was followed by furtive glances and hushed whispers, as if the air around him was different from the rest of the village. On one such night, as the full moon illuminated the village with a pale glow, Zuri felt that she could no longer bear the burden alone. She needed answers, and she knew that only one person could help her: Bakari, Nyanga's wisest elder, known for his vast knowledge of ancient stories and legends. Wearing her thickest shawl to protect Imara from the cold, she walked to Bakari's hut, with each step feeling the weight of her decision. Bakari sat in the center of his hut, surrounded by ancient scrolls and amulets that hung from the ceiling, swaying gently in the night breeze. When he saw Zuri enter, he raised his tired but welcoming eyes, inviting her to sit by the fire. Without many words, Zuri began to explain the reason for her visit, her voice wavering as she described the isolation, the judgmental looks, and the fear she felt for her son's future. "I don't know what to do, Bakari," she said, as the flames of the fire danced in her eyes. "I feel like he's special, but the village sees him as something to fear. I need to understand what this means. Why was he born like this?" Bakari remained silent for a moment, his gaze distant as if searching for answers in the memories of his own life. Finally, he stood up and walked over to a shelf full of aged parchment, his calloused hands moving carefully so as not to tear the fragile papers. He took one in particular, unrolling it on the table in the firelight. "Zuri," he began, his voice heavy with seriousness. "There is an ancient legend, passed down from generation to generation. Many have forgotten her, but I remember. They say that when the village faces a danger that cannot be defeated by the hands of man, a two-faced child will be born. This child will be a symbol of balance or chaos. Everything will depend on the heart of whoever creates it." Zuri felt her blood run cold upon hearing those words. She looked at Imara, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, as if the weight of this prophecy had no effect on him. "So you're saying he's some kind of prophecy?" he asked, his voice mixing skepticism and desperation. Bakari sighed, sitting down again. "I don't know, Zuri, but if the legend is true, your love and your choices will determine the fate of us all. He could be the bridge that saves us, or the weight that destroys us." Those words reverberated in Zuri's mind as she walked home that night. The village was plunged into silence, but in the distance, she could hear the murmurs of the villagers who were still awake, debating what to do with Imara. Some suggested that it be handed over to the elders for purification rituals, while others believed that it should be protected, even without understanding its meaning. In the days that followed, the pressure on Zuri increased. Groups began to form outside his cabin, demanding answers or action. One night, an older woman approached Zuri's window and, in a cold voice, said, "You can't keep this child to yourself, Zuri. He belongs to the spirits, and the spirits demand justice." Zuri opened the door with strength she didn't know she had, facing the woman and the villagers gathered there. "He is my son," he said, his voice firm and clear. "No legend can change that. If you are afraid, it is because you chose fear over understanding. But I choose love." Zuri's words silenced the group for a moment, but did not remove the suspicious looks. As she closed the door again, she realized that although she had won that battle, the war was still far from over. The next morning, Bakary appeared at his hut, bringing herbs and a rolled-up scroll. "Zuri," he said with a tone that mixed concern and respect, "you are brave, but courage alone is not enough. If this child truly is part of the prophecy, you will need more than strength to protect him. You will need wisdom, and wisdom comes from accepting that you may not know everything right now." "But what if I failed, Bakary?" Zuri asked, her voice finally revealing the vulnerability she had been hiding for days. "We all fail at some point, Zuri," Bakary replied, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "But the real danger is in not trying. Your love for him can save or damn us all. The choice has always been in your hands." As Bakary left, Zuri sat by the fire, holding the scroll he had left behind. She knew she would need to face him, just as she faced everything in her life. But at that moment, the weight of responsibility seemed overwhelming. She looked at Amara, who was looking at her with her small eyes, as if she already understood the destiny they shared. "I'm not going to give up on you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "No matter what happens." The fields surrounding the village of Nyanga, once lush and bountiful, began to wither under a silent plague that no one saw coming. The leaves of the crops turned black, the fruit still rotted on the branches, and a sweet, putrid smell filled the air, filling the nostrils of the villagers who worked to save what they could. The harvest, which was the village's basis for sustenance, was practically decimated in a few days. The calamity brought a new, deeper fear, one that soon found an easy target: Imara. The rumors began discreetly, like a whisper carried by the wind, but grew in volume and intensity. "Since he was born, we've had nothing but problems," a woman commented to her neighbor as she picked up dead leaves. "The storm, the strange looks from that child, and now this. It can't be a coincidence." Others began to agree, fear clouding reason. "Maybe it's a warning, or a curse," said one of the older hunters, his voice thick with superstition. "The spirits are punishing us for letting that child stay." Zuri heard everything, even if she tried to isolate herself from the growing noise. Inside her hut, she held Amara against her chest, as if she could protect him from the sharp words that ripped through the air outside. With each passing day, the number of people gathered outside grew. The whispers turned into screams, demands that something be done to purify the village. Finally, the village leaders called a meeting in the large clearing, where important decisions were always made. Zuri knew she would need to face them all. He knew that his voice was the only one that could save his son. At dusk, she headed to the clearing with Amara in her arms, her heart beating strong like the drums of a ceremony. But the determination in her eyes revealed that she was ready to fight. The crowd gathered under the pale light of the torches, which cast dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. Bakary stood there, with a heavy and thoughtful expression, while other elders murmured among themselves, clearly divided. Silence fell as Zuri entered the clearing, staring into the faces of her neighbors. "You are all blinded by fear," she began, her voice firm but full of emotion. "You blame a baby, my baby, for something you don't understand. But he is not the cause of your problems. He's just a kid." A woman raised her voice from the crowd. "And how can we know that, Zuri? Since he was born, nothing but misfortunes have befallen us. Maybe it's a sign that we've done something wrong." Zuri stepped forward, her eyes shining in the torchlight. "What if it is not a sign of punishment, but of salvation? You are so afraid of what you don't understand that you would rather destroy something before try to understand it. This is not what our ancestors taught us." Bakary stood up, raising a hand to silence the voices that were beginning to rise again. "Zuri is right about one thing," he said, his voice calm but charged with authority. "We don't understand, but we also cannot ignore the stories we know. The legend tells of a two-faced child who will emerge in times of great danger. Maybe we are looking at the wrong person as the culprit." Before the crowd could respond, something extraordinary happened. Imara, who had been quiet in Zuri's arms throughout the confrontation, began to stir. His serene face, which previously seemed like just a quirk, began to emit a soft glow, as if bathed in an inner light. The entire clearing fell silent as everyone watched, open-mouthed, at what seemed to be a supernatural manifestation. Bakari stepped forward, kneeling before Zuri and Amara. "The light of the pure face," he murmured, remembering a long-forgotten detail in the prophecy. "When danger comes, the light of the pure face will guide the village to rebirth." He stood up, turning to the other leaders and villagers. "I was blinded by fear. Amara didn't bring the plague, but she's here to guide us. The choice has always been ours, and we choose doubt and division. But we can still fix this." Zuri, with tears in her eyes, looked at everyone present, her voice now choked but still full of strength. "My son deserves love, like any other. Do not let fear cloud your hearts. Help me protect him, and together we can face anything that comes against us." The crowd was silent for a long moment, torches crackling as everyone reflected on what they had just witnessed. Slowly, one by one, they began to kneel, not before Amara, but before the truth they could finally see. It was not the baby that condemned them, but their own fears and prejudices. As Amara's glow gradually faded, Zuri felt a huge weight lifted from her shoulders. But she knew the journey was far from over. She now had the support of Bakari and it seemed much of the village. But the plague was still there, and the challenges that lay ahead would be even greater. However, that night, under the stars and torchlight, she allowed herself a moment of relief, knowing that her son had finally been seen for what he truly was, a chance at redemption for them all. The dawn in Nyanga carried a new air. The clearing that once echoed fear and distrust was now filled with voices of hope. After the revelation of the prophecy and the shining of Amara's serene face, the village finally began to see him in a different way. Not as a curse sign, but as a reminder that sometimes answers come from unexpected places. The fear has not completely disappeared. He still hovered like a shadow, but now he was confronted by something stronger, the desire to understand, to start over. Bakari called a meeting at sunrise, gathering the villagers around the ancient ceremonial fire. The torches still burned faintly from the previous nights, but the sky now had a soft hue, promising a clear day. With the ancient scrolls open before him, Bakari spoke with the wisdom and authority that everyone respected. "We make mistakes," he began, his voice firm but full of humility. "We allowed fear to guide our actions. But the ancestors gave us another chance. Amara is not the bringer of misfortune, but a symbol that we need to come together to overcome what is to come." The villagers listened in silence, many averting their eyes, ashamed of their words and actions of the past few days. It was Zuri who broke the silence with Amara safe in her arms. "I know some of you still have questions," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But he's just a kid. He didn't ask to be born this way, nor did he bring anything other than what we all bring to this world, the chance to do something meaningful. Please see him for who he really is, not what your fears tell you he can be." Zuri's words deeply touched those who heard her. Little by little, heads began to rise, and looks of understanding were exchanged. It was then that Bakari took the next step. He announced that the village would perform a ritual to ask forgiveness from the ancestors, a ceremony intended to bring purification, not only to the plague-ravaged lands, but also to the hearts of the villagers. In the days that followed, the village dedicated itself to work. Crops, devastated by the plague, were uprooted, and the land was treated with herbs and ash, according to ancient practices passed down through generations. Bakari led the rituals, with Zuri and Amara present at each one. Many villagers who had previously avoided Zuri's presence now approached to help her, offering hands that had previously pointed accusing fingers. During one of the rituals, as the sun was setting and the village was enveloped in golden light, something unexpected happened. A gentle wind blew through the trees, and the sweet, putrid smell of the plague disappeared. Villagers watched in silent wonder as birds began to return to the trees, their songs filling the air for the first time in weeks. Time passed, and the land of Nyanga began to show signs of recovery. New green shoots emerged, bringing with them the promise of a future harvest. The village, which previously seemed on the verge of collapse, was reborn along with the plantations. With each passing day, the villagers' fear of Amara was replaced by respect and, in many cases, affection. Amara grew up surrounded by love and protection. Its two faces, which were once seen as an omen of something dark, have become a symbol for the village. They reminded everyone that duality is part of life. Light and dark, courage and fear, love and doubt. Suri, who had faced so many challenges, became an example of strength and determination for the other women in the village. One morning, as Suri watched Amara playing among the crops with other children, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. He ran among the green shoots, his small bare feet kicking up dust as his laughter echoed across the field. For a moment, he stopped, looking at the sky, and the sun illuminated his face in an almost magical way. Suri smiled, tears gently running down her face. Amara was born with two faces, she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. But the village learned that they were not faces of curses, but of lessons. He brought us together, transformed us, and I will never stop loving him. As the sun set, the villagers gathered again around the ceremonial fire, no longer to discuss problems, but to celebrate. They sang and danced, thanking their ancestor for the opportunity to start over. And at the center of it all was Amara, playing between the shadows and the light, a living reminder that Nyanga's true strength came from her ability to overcome fear and find unity. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.